Hello my dear fun beings. Today's video is about an introduction and the chemical composition of plasma membrane. Before getting started, hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon next to it. This is the second video from the series Structure of the Cell. If you haven't watched the first video yet, click the I button above. Now without any further ado, let's get started. The protoplasm of all cells, may it be prokaryotic or eukaryotic, are bounded by a thin elastic membrane known as the plasma membrane or cell membrane. Let us have a look at its chemical composition. The amounts of proteins, lipids and carbohydrates present in the plasma membrane show variations based on the type of cells and their functions. For example, in RBCs or red blood cells, the ratio of protein, lipid and carbohydrate is 52:40:8, whereas in the myelin sheath, the protein-lipid ratio is 0.2:1. These proteins are of three different classes: structural, carrier and enzymes. So, let's begin with the structural proteins. The structural proteins are the backbone of the plasma membrane. They are non-catalytic in nature. These structural proteins are of two types: intrinsic and extrinsic proteins. Intrinsic or integral protein constitute about 70% of the plasma membrane. They penetrate the membrane partially or completely. Most of them span the bilayer completely and a part of them is exposed on both sides of the membrane. Some of them span the membrane several times and are usually amphipathic. Amphipathic molecules are those that have both hydrophobic and hydrophilic parts. They are also known as amphiphilic molecules. Many of the intrinsic proteins exhibit lateral diffusion like this or rotational movement like this. But this is only about the axis. They do not exhibit the flip-flop movement, which changes their axis. The extrinsic or principal membrane protein constitute 30% of the membrane proteins. They are found on the surface of the membrane and do not penetrate the membrane. They form electrostatic or hydrogen bonding with the polar portions of the intrinsic protein or the polar components of the cell membrane. Now, let us see how the proteins are attached to the membrane. It may be a single helix that may pass through the membrane, or it may span the membrane multiple times. Keep in mind, this is a single protein. Or it may be attached to a fatty acid chain towards the cytoplasm, or it may be attached to an oligosaccharide chain facing outside the cytoplasm or the cell. The last two are most commonly seen in extrinsic proteins. Now, let us see about the next class of proteins, which are the carrier proteins. As the name suggests, they form passages through which various substances can pass. Next are the enzymes. These are catalytic in nature and form important components of the membrane. Now, let's have a look at the functions of the membrane proteins. Number 1. They act as cell adhesion molecules. Number 2. They act as transport pumps or as carriers. Number 3 is they act as receptors which aid in cell signaling pathways. Next are the enzymes, and the last one are the antigens. Now let's dive into the most important part, that is the lipids. They vary from 45 to 55% in total mass, but there are a few variations like these. Lecithin, cephalin and sphingomyelin constitute 50 to 65% of the lipids. Phosphatidylserine, phosphatidylglycerol, cardiolipin etc. constitute 10 to 20%, and the remaining percent is taken up by cholesterol and cholesterol esters, around 25%. So the lipids are amphipathic in nature and are arranged in a bilayer with the polar head groups directed outwards and the non-polar tail groups opposed to each other. They show lateral, rotational and flip-flop movement. Now, let us have a look at the functions of membrane lipids. They are responsible for maintaining the structure and fluidity of the plasma membrane. Phospholipids are secondary messengers for certain hormone actions. They are also required for certain enzyme activation. Now, let's see carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are 2 to 10% of the plasma membrane. They form glycoproteins, glycolipids by combined with proteins and lipids. Here are some examples of carbohydrates. Their main function is to maintain a charge and cell adhesion. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Please hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon next to it. Hoping to see you all guys soon. Love you all. Bye bye.